We worked with a client and they would get to a certain procedure count in a week that was their target. There'd be lots of celebration. We did it. We got to the number. Now let's keep it here. And then the next 2 to 3 weeks, it would dip down. And then it would come back up and hit their goal and then dip down. And it was very frustrating because there was nothing staring at them saying, why is there this variation? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Physician Growth Accelerator, a show where we break down your private medical practice systems into vitals, give you the tools to diagnose root cause of what may be restricting your growth, and prescribe what to do about it. I'm your host, Zed Williamson, and I think that maybe you have hit a plateau in your business. Does it ever feel like that? Or maybe it feels like you run up against a ceiling and then you bounce down from there. Like there's this top point that you haven't been able to push past, whether it's number of patients, number of treatments, revenue, profitability. You just always feel like you get to that spot and you either stay there or you come down. Well, I believe every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. So although it may sting, it's helpful for you to say, I am operating a system that is perfectly designed for me to hit a plateau or for me to hit a ceiling and bounce back down. The reason is now it'll open up our mind to look for what may be the root cause of that happening. Now, if you've listened to this podcast, you know I talk about systems a lot, and sometimes systems get put into this category of non-human, and that's not true at all. Every system has a human aspect to it. The way we think, the way we behave is a system. If you think about the brain and neuroscience, heuristics, bias, all of that is a system. It's actually predictable and when you put in these inputs of what's going to come out the other side as it relates to how people behave. A system. Okay, so why does that matter? What I want you to think about is in your practice, we are all affected by something called bounded rationality. A gentleman by the name of Herbert Simon came up with this idea a ways back. He actually won a Nobel Prize in economics around the concept. But bounded rationality is a bias or a heuristic, the way the brain acts, where it actually makes relatively rational decisions based on the information it has. Now, the challenge is we tend not to have complete information, especially as it relates to distant parts of a system. So let me use an example. I'm going to steal it straight from Herbert. If you imagine a shared cow pasture, okay, and there's this idea that if I have cows on that pasture, I'm able to earn more money. And so I should put as many cows on that pasture as possible. But the problem is I'm not thinking about the impact of everybody potentially doing that. I don't know if other people are putting more cows on the pasture. So what I might be doing is I might be ruining the land, making it so there's no grass, and the cows can't flourish. Okay? That's bounded rationality. I'm not thinking about the distant parts of the system that I am impacting with my immediate behavior because I'm looking for something that's helping me as the individual. I'm not necessarily thinking about it from the collective. And specifically in game theory or economics, this is related to as tragedy of the commons. So what the heck does cow pastures, bounded rationality, tragedy of the commons have to do with your private medical practice? Let me tell a couple stories that we've experienced specifically. We worked with a client and they would get to a certain procedure count in a week that was their target. There'd be lots of celebration. We did it. We got to the number. Now let's keep it here. And then the next 2 to 3 weeks, it would dip down. And then it would come back up and hit their goal and then dip down. And it was very frustrating because there was nothing staring at them saying, why is there this variation? And I'm going to relate, this might sound strange, but I'm going to relate some of your office staff to that cow pasture. The reason is because there's times where we see resources as something that are just always there, that we can't really deplete it. And when we're thinking individually, we can actually exploit a resource that impacts the system down the path. I'll use a very specific example. This is an interesting idea. The number one reason that private medical practices miss phone calls, get ready, is because they miss phone calls. Now that seems strange, but think about this. If a patient calls a practice and they don't answer, what does that patient do a lot of the time? They call back. Or, maybe 15% of them leave a voicemail. And so now think of the impact of that on your staff as they're going through their day. Here's a voicemail. I need to spend the time to listen to it. If I'm doing that, I can't be on the phone. During that time, someone else is calling and the call gets missed. Now, they may leave a voicemail or they may call back. And so now let's say this person listens to the voicemail and now they're calling this person back while someone else is calling back a second time because the call was missed. And so now this time they leave a message. And so what you end up seeing in a practice, and we see this all the time, is that most of the calls are actually repeat patients. And once you start answering calls, the overall call volume goes down because now you have not overexploited the resource of being able to talk to a patient. And we have literally seen that hundreds of times. It's very predictable at this point. But let's go back to the idea of a target procedure count per week, all the leading indicators, all the things that we try to do to get to that point are all on track. Everything is saying, yep, here's what we should expect. And then the outcome is we're underperforming 2 to 3 weeks after that one performance week. Boom. Every time. It's repeatable. Whoop. So what do you think is going on here? I want you to think about your practice and what are the resources that you believe the practice has access to that maybe are more limited to what you think. Or maybe it's a resource that once you use the resource, it makes the resource not usable, and the more you do it, the less usable it is. So let's just talk about a patient. Patient calls and they book an appointment. That's taking up somebody's time. When the patient comes in, they need to fill out paperwork. They need to be roomed. That is taking up somebody's time. During that consult, there's interaction. That's taking up somebody's time. And as those things lead towards maybe a diagnostic, CT scan, MRI, whatever specialty you're in, and as it relates to what is needed to understand what the solution is for this patient, that takes up time. It takes up a resource. And then if that person moves to a procedure, let's say the treatment is a procedure, what typically happens after a procedure? Usually a follow-up. Is it by phone? Is it in person? How long is it? How scheduled is it? Who does it? How often? So what we were able to uncover in this specific practice is there wasn't a change in performance. There wasn't an actual thing that made it so they weren't hitting their goal from the standpoint of they were doing the wrong thing. They hit their goal, which made it so they couldn't hit their goal. Because once they did their target number of procedures in that week that they were really working towards, the impact of that meant less consults were being seen because more was done for treatment and diagnostics. More post-op interaction was done, which reduced the potential number of new consults, diagnostics, interaction. Phone calls go up because you're dealing with more calls. You're calling insurance. You're dealing with pre-auth. You're overwhelming the system. You're exploiting the system for your individual goal because we want to hit this goal. And what we're not thinking about is the impact on the system in those distant parts. So what does that mean? Just hire more people? No. It means have an understanding because there is something that is limiting your growth. And if you can identify what that one thing is, and then you look to grow the capacity of that throughput. Is it that you need another MA of a very specific type that makes it so there's never increased pressure on part of the system that would bring in new patients to be able to do more procedures. And I just want you to think about when you do a treatment, because this is literally bounded rationality. Bounded rationality is I'm going to make a really good decision based on the information I have. And you might be thinking to yourself, man, I could do 30 treatments a week. Sometimes we only do 8. What the heck's that all about? And you're not thinking about those parts outside of the system. So what I want you to do is reflect on, what does it mean to the entire organization if you were to do 30 treatments in a week? How many appointments does that mean leading up to that? How many pre-ops? How many post-ops? What kind of phone calls? What kind of insurance information is required or interaction? Are these patients private insurance? Are they Medicare? All of these things that maybe speed up or slow down the entire system. And I want you to think about your practice as that cow pasture. And this idea, the tragedy of the commons, is sometimes we pull from a resource and we're not thinking about the impact downstream that it's going to do to the system. And if you are in a spot with your business where you've been around, it's relatively predictable, it stays about the same, you're hitting a plateau, you're bumping up against the ceiling, and it's coming down, chances are your success is creating the inability to achieve your success. And once you wrap your head around that, you can start to identify, gosh, what it is my PA does all my consults, but they also do all the post-ops. And when we have 30 post-ops in a week, we can't do as many consults. Just a random example. But think about this as a system. Remember, every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. If you're hitting a plateau, your system is designed to do that. So what do you have to change? What do you have to identify? Is bounded rationality making you ignore information that would help you make a better decision downstream in distant parts of the system? Are you experiencing a tragedy of the commons where you're pulling too much from a resource and it's limiting the impact that it can have on the rest of your organization? If you ever want to think about your private medical systems, or what we refer to as vitals, go to physiciangrowthaccelerator.com and click on Vitals. And we'll see you next time on the Physician Growth Accelerator. Thanks.